Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Leadership Warriors. Yes, that's right, Leadership Warriors number 3. Today, I'm here with Heather Younger, CEO of Customer Fanatics and professional leadership coach, which works with C-level executives on those leadership warrior skills that really build employee engagement and company culture. Heather wrote all about it in the 7 Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty, a best-selling book that you can find on Amazon. You can actually pick up a free chapter of the book on Heather's site. I'll put it in a link in the full post below. Heather, it's awesome to have you on the show. The demand for leadership and leadership skills and coaching in particular has grown tremendously. Why do you think this is true for coaching in particular?
It's interesting. The self-awareness, I think, is a big one. So I think that over time, I think leaders are just knowing that they have some blind spots. And sometimes they have a lack of trust within their organization. They can't really go talk to or trust maybe some of the feedback they're getting internally. And so, but because they know that they have those blind spots, they are looking and they're seeking out help with the areas they know they're weakest in. And I think that's one of the things. And the other thing is word of mouth. Again, folks just, it's like keeping up with the Joneses. They hear their friends talk about how much that certain things about their leadership skills have improved. And then they go, oh, wow, and that I have a coach. And so I want to make sure that I do what they do because she has a coach. And so it's just, it's interesting how that happens. That's okay because it works well for people like me who like to work with people like them. The other thing is sometimes it happens that it's driven by their boss. And that tends to be why people hire me is the corporation hires me, a CEO or a COO, something like that hires me. And they're doing that because maybe they're seeing performance issues or maybe not. Maybe they want to just grow that particular person to be kind of part of succession planning, right? And they want to be able to up their skills. And so they might bring me in to do that. And so sometimes the boss brings that on. And then also they're getting coached because they want to advance. They're seeing people move up in the organization and they're wondering what is missing in me that I'm not moving up at the kind of fast pace other than my colleagues are. So I think that's one of the biggest reasons too. And then sometimes it's just, I find that people are looking for their passion. They want to know, I'm doing this thing at my job and I think I could be a lot more effective here. It's not that they're necessarily looking to leave, but they want to, find that passion spot. What's the new thing that's going to reignite me as a leader here in this organization? So that would be probably one of the other reasons why they're seeking out coaching.
Certainly. And I would think that someone who becomes a leader or enters a leadership role, they may now have started out thinking, oh, I'm going to become a great leader. But once they are in that situation, then they decide, I'd like to become a good leader.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think it's almost like not knowing what's there until you're in it. And so that's why that awareness kind of increases like, oh, there's a lot more I could do if I could just be more like Harry or Pete or Sally. And of course, in the coaching and the conversations that we have, it's really more about, I had one person who I could tell was really trying not to be himself. And I said, listen, that's not what I'm wanting you to do. Here we're looking to figure out how do we create and bring out the best in you? That's the key, the best in you. And how do we take the things that maybe either, driving you nuts about yourself or maybe your colleagues nuts? How do we kind of soften those things or pivot those things? Just really opening our minds up to think differently and act differently.
Absolutely. So you run an entire training suite, if you will, as well as a coaching.
Yeah, so it could be that I'm running kind of I could be facilitating leadership discussions around culture. I could be coaching individual leaders one-on-one, but inside the corporate framework, or it could be that we're just sitting at a table and figuring out kind of, there may be some issues or inner dynamics inside the team, the leadership team, and they may need to kind of get it out on table. And so I might be that almost like a mediator. That's where I get to use my JD a little bit, right? Because I'm able to take that legal background and go, okay, let's see, there's some complications here with the relationships and how can we settle those down a little bit? And so I can tend to do that as well. One of the things I do too, which I love, and it really informs a lot of what I do, is the employee focus groups. So it kind of goes hand in hand with the surveys that TINYpulse does, which is why that partnership works so well, is being able to get that voice of the employee and then then make sure that I take that message and to kind of throw it or communicate it to the leadership team so they can then infuse that voice into all their strategy and everything they do. So, so the coaching part is kind of like, it's one part of it, but I think when you look at it holistically, it's any angle of the business that touches both the front line and those leaders, and how do we make that connection stronger?
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
And so obviously, Heather, you work with a variety of managers, folks who have some amount of leadership experience. And I wanted to start on both ends of the spectrum. What would you say is the number one skill that you find even very experienced managers having to work on first to improve?
It kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier. So if they're coming to me because their boss said they need it, then what I tend to see that it's either a self-awareness issue, an empathy issue for coworkers around them, like colleagues at the same level, or their employees. Maybe they're getting complaints about things. Communication and just empathy, kind of just general. It's a lot of soft skill type of things.
Mm-hmm.
What I do find with the so folks that are over very, very large teams, they still struggle. It's one of those things, they say you can have it all, but whether it's men or women, they still struggle with that work-life balance. They try to figure out how to integrate, their lives, and it's just a tough thing. So I tend to help them kind of work through that as well. What are your priorities, and helping them prioritize things. And then also helping them to really define what their passions are about what they do every day. Because that does help, and it sometimes rejuvenates them, right? It gets them excited about what they're doing every day for their teams and for the organization. So I would say those are the key things that we would see when folks are trying to come and they want to get coaching services. They tend to want to be focused in those areas.
Sure. And then on the other end of the spectrum, with managers who are perhaps starting in a leadership position, or and are in the fortunate position to get coaching from you, what would you find? What do you find are the number one skills that you find them having to work on?
I'm going to be honest. I do mostly executive coaching, so they're going to have most of the experience kind of intact, the kind of baseline experience. Having said that, I find that whether they're an executive leader, kind of been in it for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, right? Or the ones that are coming in, there are just the basic things of, communicating effectively, making sure that they know how it is they should be interacting, not only with their frontline or their team, but also with their colleagues and with their boss. So I think that ends up being something that the awareness around that still exists. Believe it or not, after 20 years of being in it, you can see people are still like, I don't really know like how to approach my boss who, I'm now a VP and they're a C-suite, a CEO or COO. How do I do that still, even though I've been doing this for a long time? So there's still some of that, again, the soft skill, not knowing when to engage, that emotional intelligence kind of stuff that I find to be a weakness, whether you're just starting out and you're kind of nervous, or you're a more seasoned professional.
Sure. And so when reaching out to, say, a manager of any level that might answer to someone like a VP or a C-level executive, are there exercises that you have them go through to make that easier, to help practice with repetition? What would you say is a good exercise for someone who's looking to do that today, for example, and maybe have a conversation with their manager?
Well, it's interesting. Again, remember, in most cases, the people who I'm coaching have their boss has hired me. That happens a lot, or one of their bosses has. So if it's an executive suite and they're deciding to bring me in, and then they want me to kind of coach either them or the people that are right at the next level, they have. So what happens is, if I have a close relationship with my sponsor or my client, then I'm able to go to them. I'm able to kind of set the groundwork to say, without kind of divulging confidences, to say, just so you know, there are some steps or some things that this person, we've talked about, and they're going to want to take, and they're going to need to engage with you in that regard. And so, play nicely in the sandbox, play with us a little bit, cooperate in their growth, right? And then they tend to be a little more receptive. So that's one thing that helps, because I have that relationship with my client. But in the case of what I found, so I have an example. I have one client, great guy, but he doesn't understand kind of the differences in the communication styles. And so because I offer that, I'm DISC certified and have DISC training, and I'm a DISC coach, which is basically kind of a communication style assessment and a behavioral style assessment. And so I'm able to look at, and I know what this person is, and I'm able to talk to them and use either that kind of vernacular or four lenses or strengths finders, and help them kind of dig into who they are and how they're composed and really understand that. And then figure out the people that they're having a hard time communicating with, if it is their boss, for example, what is kind of their makeup. And you can't obviously, you can't put everybody in a box on this, right? We don't want to, it's not cookie cutter. We all have a lot of complexities, but if you can understand some of those foundational things, I think it does help the framework to say, okay, now that I know this person needs to be addressed this way, at this speed, at this time, in this manner, like this person needs data and this person needs vision, right? When you understand that, then you're able to have even those complicated or testy kind of conversations. They could go not so great if you went in there with no understanding. But if you seek to understand the other person, I find that it goes over much better. And so that's kind of how I coach them, is figuring out, let's understand who you are, and then now let's understand who that person is. And then now let's coach through how that conversation may go. So it has to kind of go step by step.
Right. And do you find that there are stumbling blocks, and you'll have to come in at a later time to help help those who may have overcompensated in some ways or try to adjust too much to a communication style?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, because what happens is you have to have a maturity around these concepts. You have to have used them often, like kind of what you're alluding to. You have to practice. Perfect practice makes perfect. So if they've only done it once, then they're like, yeah, you're like, they're thinking you're in a box of this thing. And it's like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to step outside that box. We have to really look. What I find out about leaders is that you have to take that time to really kind of build the relationship, set the foundation of the relationship with anything. I mean, within my book, I talk about it, but really, when you're talking about employee relationships or customer relationships, right? Before you go in and go big with something, you want to take that time to understand where the person's coming from. Their filter changes, right? It's not the same filter every day, because gosh, I could have a great relationship with you, and then I don't know that your mother just died, God forbid, right? Or something like that. And so we have to, in order for me to have that relationship with you or the interaction, I kind of need to build up a little bit and just understand where you're coming from that day. So yeah, that's the thing that I coach them on, but I do notice there is a little bit of that overcompensation. And I think in the key, you just step back and go, okay, how could you have done that differently? What is it that you think went wrong in that exchange? And then have them start thinking through that. And then I can kind of pulse their, no pun intended, pulse kind of through their thoughts and then continue to ask questions that way. So.
Right, absolutely. Having that feedback loop of someone who's dispassionately looking at the situation can be extremely helpful. So Heather, I wanted to ask you, in the 7 laws of employee loyalty, I was particularly interested by law number 4, which is grow and promote employees' talents. I think a big source of difficulty when we talk to leaders about this is succeeding at nurturing talent in a scalable way. And by that, I mean, nurturing talent is hard enough to do in a one-on-one setting. If you're a parent, it can be hard enough to nurture talent in a child. How is someone at a large organization supposed to do this?
Well, I think no matter what, kind of like what I talked about just a minute ago, whether it's large or small, and we have teams, and we might have teams of hundreds of people, we have to not only ourselves as senior leaders or executive leaders, make sure that we build relationships with our staff, with our team first. So, the one-on-one relationship makes a huge difference because, and this more than anything, that leaders or a bad manager, a manager who's not really kind of intuitive or listening or paying attention to the needs of their team members, are those who drive more disloyalty in the workplace. Mm-hmm. So, that's going to be, no matter what, big or small, relationships are king in any regard. So if you want to move up, you have to have relationships. If you want to, have a strong team that wants to stay with you and go to bat for you, relationships are the number one, right? So that's going to be key no matter what. But there are some things I think organizationally. So in my book, I talk about, the mentoring or how do you set up kind of a career pathing model or things like that. And I think that the first thing that has to happen is that the mission and the vision and kind of the strategic direction have to be aligned with whatever you put in place. So, You don't, what I find out is there's like a hodgepodge, or like 5 people are doing different things, right? And it's just not, you're not being effective. And that happens in small or very large organizations. So on top of those things and the alignment that we're looking at, I think that making sure that when you get all those kind of soft things in place, or you make sure that the direction and everything is aligned that way, that you also make sure that everybody's clear about the why. Why are you doing these things? So maybe you point to your numbers. Maybe you do have retention numbers. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want to actually just, you're great now, like the Zappos or the Southwest of the world, right? They're known for these great employee experiences. Nobody's perfect, and so we've heard that's the case. And even my book, I talk about Zappos, where not everything's perfect, right? But they have these processes they put in place, and I think that's the key. That's really the key thing. That whether you're small or big, even if you choose to only adopt 2 things that I talk about in the book, if you put a process in place, you can make it more foolproof, right? You can make it where it happens every single time, or there's a funnel, there's a pipeline. Let's say it's a mentorship program, and you have the program in place, and you put a process in place that says, when an employee gets to this place in their position, this thing happens. It's kind of like a trigger, right? And you just continue to set that thing up so that they end up funneling into that for succession planning. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but I do think, once you've done all of these things above, process is key. And it's funny because I don't know about you, but the same thing goes for customers. So the external or the internal customers, there's not a lot of difference to the extent that if you want something done, you got to put a process in place. If you don't, it's going to be like here or there, and your experience will be very inconsistent. And I don't know, that's just what I found. I don't know about you.
Absolutely. We find that as well. And in terms of, process, treating each situation equitably, and then, depending on the results of that process, iterating on it in an additive way can help really drive improvement. I think that's super insightful, and we totally agree with that here at TINYpulse. But that's generally a best practice in most things when it comes to driving customers, driving sales, and driving really any business result is treating it with that funnel mentality. Thank you so much, Heather.
And what I always tell people too, so when we think about employee experience, it's like 98% about how they feel. And it's the same thing with customers. So it's how they feel about their interaction with you that drives how they kind of perceive their experience with you. And so if we think about, again, if I can leave anybody with anything, people that are listening to this, it would probably be for sure that if you focus on the relationship first. So if you have a complicated relationship that's one where it's a little testy, there are barriers in the way, you can see people putting walls up. The more that we kind of hit the core of that, I guess, with building relationships first, whether it's with our coworkers, the coworkers at our colleague, kind of at our same level, with our boss, with our customers, relationships are king. And so when you're looking at employee loyalty, everything that we do, we can scale some of that by putting a process in place. And again, I think too, that when you're thinking about, in this specific instance, employee loyalty and the relationship you put in place, and of course process, leaders, managers are the biggest reasons why people leave a company. So your experience can be just fantastic one day and horrible the next, because the manager that you put in place maybe wasn't focused on relationships, maybe didn't have a lot of empathy. And so I would say that would be kind of the larger soft skills that I think they should really work on in that case.
Awesome. Heather, thank you so much. With that, I think we're going to call this a video. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. For all you leadership warriors, be sure to follow Heather on Twitter, Customer Fanatics, with an X at the end. Check out Heather's book at customerfanatics.com, where you can learn more about how a professional leadership coach gets it done. If you have a question for me or one of our experts, send me an email over at dearandrew@tinypulse.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, and as always, to happier employees.
Bye, everybody.